New origins and causes of multiple sclerosis and other neurodegenerative diseases have recently been suggested in the research. With the help of phonar upright multi-position MR, abnormal CSF flow and stasis have been shown to be associated with these conditions, and CSF flow stasis has been associated with past cranio-cervical trauma. Dr. Evans and I discussed the research and more on this episode of the Upper Cervical Chiropractic Research Show. I've also done an overview and summary video you can find on the channel if you'd like to see that. Hi there, I'm Dr. Kevin Leach here with the Chiropractic Deep Dive Podcast, bringing you the most important research and information on conservative primary spine care, upper cervical chiropractic care, and traditional chiropractic care. These research reviews, interviews, and episodes are made for you, whether you're a medical doctor, patient, or concerned family member or friend. The goal of these shows is to bring awareness of the importance of taking care of our spine and the impact it has on our health and the hundreds of different health conditions it could cause without us realizing it. I'm really trying to bring value with these, so I'd appreciate commenting on the videos, hitting the like button, and sharing them with as many people as you can. You never know who might need to see it. And consider subscribing to the channel so you can see all the other episodes and videos coming out. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your support. Now on to the show. Okay, welcome back everyone to the Upper Cervical Chiropractic Research Show. This is episode number 7. I am Dr. Kevin Leach and I'm here once again with Dr. Tyler Evans. How are you, sir?
I'm well. Good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend. So this episode's research review title is The Possible Role of Cranio-Cervical Trauma and Abnormal CSF Hydrodynamics in the Genesis of Multiple Sclerosis by Raymond, Damadian, and David Chu, and it's published in Physiological Chemistry and Physics and Medical NMR. So, Dr. Evans, as usual, give us our overview. What is the goal of the research paper? What are they trying to suggest?
This paper builds, right? So we now have reviewed the whiplash and CTE cerebellar tonsillar ectopia paper that Michael Freeman did with Scott Rosa back in 2010. This is now done in 2011. These guys have a relationship with Ray Damadian. Ray Damadian is the original creator of MRI. And in the, I believe, late 90s or early 2000s, he developed this technology of upright MRI. He calls it phonar. That's his technology. And what's really cool is Dr. Rosa, Scott Rosa in New York, developed a relationship with Ray Damadian, and they started to see patterns in the upper neck problems that upper cervical chiropractors, especially, Dr. Scott Rosa, has taken care of, and then referred patients in for this upright MRI technology to look specifically at the cranio-cervical junction. So the base of the skull, C1 and C2, and the tissue that surrounds it. And we also did you and I, Dr. Leach, we just reviewed that paper on craniospinal hydrodynamics by Michael Flanagan. Sorry, the other Freeman, Flanagan, all the names.
Oh yes, yep.
Yeah. So just trying to keep them straight. But so it's really interesting because now we're developing this case around what's going on at the CCJ and what are we seeing in upright MRI. And Ray Damadian is excited about it. So he's produced this paper, and we're seeing this pattern with MS patients. And so he poses the question, well, is there a possible role for trauma in the upper neck and developing multiple sclerosis? And we know that, in the literature, we talked about it, I think on the craniospinal hydrodynamics paper, where does MS come from, right? So what's the etiology? What's the cause of it? Well, in this paper, Dr. Damadian is posing that he sees this pattern that people come in with MS when they've had severe trauma to their head and neck prior. So what they see in this paper is they study 8 normal people and then 8 MS patients that come in as what does he call it? As needed, or just
they
basically
were first come, first served.
First come, first served.
So they weren't chosen and picked.
They weren't chosen.
They weren't cherry picked. They were just boom, first one, the MS to come in. Right. So they weren't just trying to pick and choose which ones had CSF obstruction or anything. They were just like MS diagnosis, boom. Yeah.
Yep. Right. So these patients come in and first they study, they do a full history and examine, what's gone on with these people. And I believe it was 7 of the MS patients had a history of trauma. Is that correct, Dr. Leach?
7 had severe head and neck trauma, 5 of which were motor vehicle collisions.
Yes, right. So, and that's something that you and I see all the time is that motor vehicle accidents, that's probably one of the number one reasons people come into my office because those whiplash type injuries, whiplash associated disorders, they create problems with the cranio-cervical junction and CSF flow, right? And so in this paper, he goes in and he sees that, well, these patients that have had trauma and have MS, they have pathology in their cine CSF flow studies. So what's a cine? There's a lot of layers to this paper, but what's a cine CSF flow study? That is MRI over time. So you have a patient, stabilize them. It's actually quite hard to do, but it gets invaluable information.
It's hard because the patient has to stay still for so long.
Stay still, yeah, and you're you're trying to minimize movement so that you can see these tiny fluctuations in CSF movement in the brain and in the canal and the neck, and you see these they see these eddies and currents and they see these leakages in the ventricles, deep ventricles of the brain. So here we go. We can get into the anatomy of the brain and the CSF flow. So the ventricles of the brain, there's the 2 ventricles in the center of the brain. They're in the deep center of the brain, right in the middle. The choroid plexus, correct me if I'm wrong, the choroid plexus is where the CSF is created and then comes out and is pumped down, and it's the only way. It's not CSF flows, it doesn't circulate. There isn't circulation. There's
which we'll actually be going over on the next paper. I'll do we'll do a quick review on that as far as why that is, but go on.
Yep. So what they're seeing is that this CSF gets blocked in certain areas, specifically in areas where we might have damage or injury to the cervical spine. Also in the brain, right? But we're seeing these pockets of increased signal intensity, which is like whitening in the MRI, and that's oftentimes around the areas where we have lesions that then get called multiple sclerosis, right?
Right.
So that kind of comes back to that question we posed. Gosh, I think it was in the Cranio-Spinal Hydrodynamics paper. We were having this conversation.
Yeah.
Like, wait, how does that relate to MS? So here's where we're seeing the pathology, and it leaks into the brain. And now we have this pooling of CSF flow and stasis, which we'll talk about in the next paper. But so here they're seeing it. They're recording it. They're seeing it on cine, where cine is like movie, right? Cinematography.
Cinema, right.
Yeah, cinema, right. So over time, they're seeing that there's these backups, and it's not good, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's a good kind of start.
Yeah, that's a great on that question that we did pose. I think it's interesting because I was under the understanding when I listened to Dr. Rosa years ago, when he started talking about we have this new mechanism that may be causing multiple sclerosis. I was under the impression that it wasn't a demyelinating process, but it
Right.
was an inflammatory process. But I think that's wrong. I think because
Yeah.
what they're saying here, and in the conclusion, what they're saying is that stasis, that buildup of toxins, and that CSF not being able to get out of there causes a leakage of the
Mhm.
CSF into the parenchyma, or just the brain tissue and the nerves in, right outside, whether it's the choroid plexuses or whether it's just in the brain.
Mhm.
And that leakage brings in, it says here, 300 different polypeptides and at least 6 antigenic proteins. And so
Yeah.
then what happens is, you're not supposed to have those things in the brain.
Right.
The immune system says, what are you doing here? And it will attack those. And that's where the autoimmune aspect comes into, attacking those nerves and having that autoimmune response to demyelinating. So I think
Nailed it.
the demyelination process is happening, which I didn't think before. I was like, oh, there's a different mechanism. It's actually not demyelinating. But I think now it makes sense. There's both, right? There's the inflammation, almost like a leaky gut kind of thing, right? People with leaky gut, they build up these intolerances to foods because there's antibodies, and the body sees it as a pathogen, so it's attacking it. So I thought that was an interesting kind of conclusion as far as bringing it full circle, right?
You nailed it. You
Yeah.
nailed it. And just to kind of agree and take it from there one step further. So both and, right? So it's it's both things happening, and as well, there's another process that a lot of neurological doctors, neurologists, and brain surgeons are studying this problem of CTE, not cerebellar tonsillar ectopia, but chronic traumatic encephalopathy,
Right.
and the tau proteins that actually here in Boston, I'm in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Boston's an hour away from me, down, I believe it's at Boston University. One of the lead researchers there, Ann McKee, I think is her name, they are studying these football players have head and neck trauma, constant head and neck trauma, and their brains are filled with tau protein demyelination degradation. So here we go, right? Here we have a possible cause from trauma of the head and the neck, and now we're having these inflammatory processes happening in the brain because CSF is not flowing properly. We're getting pooling, we're getting stasis, right?
So question because I don't know as much as I should about the CTE in Boston and whatnot. I mean, I know about it obviously, but with the tau proteins, are these football players found with the tau proteins? I know there's been a lot of unfortunate suicides and things with these, Junior Seau and these, famous football players. Are they getting, it seems like almost the symptomatology is different. That might be something the research in the future could address. Like the CTE for the football players, they almost get manic are they the same symptoms as these patients with a history of Cranio-Cervical Trauma getting MS because of leakages, because of stasis and injury, et cetera? And are the NFL players getting the same thing and the same kind of symptoms, or different symptoms? And I wonder what
What's the correlate?
what would the correlation or difference be in those? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I mean, I can surmise. Obviously, this isn't in the literature that I found where we've studied the difference between an MS patient and a football player that has been diagnosed, because they're diagnosed after they're post-mortem diagnosed, right? So it's an awful thing, and it's kind of hard to talk about because it's such a life altering thing, right? But these guys, right? So these football players, and I actually there's an article in I think it was Outdoor Magazine by someone that I knew, and he wrote back in the early 2000s about it, something about the X Games and head and neck trauma. But it's all of these people that have these chronic bad head and neck injuries, they develop depression, they develop bipolar disorder, they develop these problems that have, in the DSM, there's no linkage to trauma to the head or neck. It's just, oh, you have an imbalance, a chemical imbalance.
Explain the DSM for people that have no
Sure.
idea what that means.
So DSM is, I'd have to look it up, but it's a diagnosis and management of psychological disorders, something to that effect, right? So it's the book that is how psychologists and psychiatrists diagnose people with disorders and then therefore go about treatment, right? So, this is we're definitely kind of getting off track, but I mean, these are things that to me are fascinating because there's a very seemingly linear pathology that I'm seeing, or etiology and pathology that I'm seeing with head and neck trauma. Yeah, some of these people might just be having one rollover car accident. Football players, NFL players have massive trauma every 30 seconds, right? Every minute and a half or whatever it is, however fast the plays go, I mean, listen to the book, League of Denial, and you hear the story of these football players where they're talking about it's literally like getting hit by a truck every minute and a half or so. I mean, no wonder their symptoms are worse, right? Like these guys have very similar symptoms, but at a higher rate, right? So, to get it back on track here, let's focus on the paper at hand. But yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting topic that, we're seeing, this is the first paper, I think, where they had these upright MRI studies, cine MRI studies, where they actually were able to do Doppler study, velocity flow studies. So this is actually a picture, pre and post. So here's the pre, here's the post. So all this bumpiness in the field is the velocity changes. We don't like lots of velocity changes in the fluid flow around the brain. When you have that, you have jolting injury to the tissue. So it's what we call that water hammer, right?
Yeah, we talked about that too with the hydrodynamics paper. Yep.
Right. So if we can calm that down by taking out some of those pathologies in the flow pattern, in the way the fluid flows around the brain, around the spinal cord, it calms that down. It gets the toxins away. It allows for the inflammation to decrease. And we're seeing that here. These patients had symptomatic relief.
So important to point out, and obviously this is the upper cervical chiropractic research show, that graph that you just showed is a pre and post atlas orthogonal upper cervical chiropractic pre and post, right? So the obstruction, which can be many different things, the obstruction in this case was a misalignment in the upper cervical spine, in the cranio-cervical junction, right? Just to kind of be clear that was a pre and post to show that, which is, it's huge. It's phenomenal. Like it's huge, right? And so that's just proof and shows again we are potentially and almost probably doing for every single patient that we adjust from a misaligned position into a normal position. So huge. Yeah.
And just to kind of highlight one or two big things that are found in this paper that have never been seen before is that one, in this paper, they study with MRI patients that have MS, and they find that these MS patients, they link trauma and pathology in the CSF flow, right? So that's never been shown before this paper. And this paper does an amazing job. Obviously, it's only 8 patients. We should do, 1,000 and do a randomized control trial and all that stuff. But
okay, on that point, before we move on to your other one, I think it's important because a lot of medical providers and probably a lot of the healthcare profession looks at disc bulges, disc herniations, cervical pathology is a normal aging process. And what we're seeing and what it's suggesting is that the trauma is leading to cervical pathology, leading to CSF stasis, leading to these problems, right?
Right.
Um,
And that
yeah.
was the second point I was going to
Okay.
make.
Got it.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, I had a quick question about the tau proteins in the post-mortem autopsies.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no way to test those tau proteins in the brain before.
I think that they've tried to come up with ways, but I don't think they've been
I don't
able
think
to.
it's been anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that it's important for MS patients. If you have MS, if you are a practitioner that takes care of MS patients, an upright MRI, we showed in the CTE whiplash paper with Michael Freeman in 2010, that if you have these problems, you should investigate with an upright MRI. And specifically, these cine sequences, they give us a lot of information about fluid flow and what's happening in the brain that we've never been able to get before. And Ray Damadian and the Phonar machines are the only machines that have this capability to that I know of, to this extent that I know of. And so support them. Go get a scan from them. Have your neurologist look at it. Have your radiologist look at it. Obviously, if you need help with that, Dr. Leach and I are good resources. I have a radiologist that I use down in Florida. He is phenomenal with these MRI studies. So you need a specific type of imaging. You need a specific type of radiologist to read it. And then what do you do with that information? Well, that can dictate how you move forward. And what I would recommend is that you get your upper neck checked for cranio-cervical junction instability and maybe misalignment at the upper neck, and have an upper cervical chiropractor look at that. Those are some of the big takeaways that I think we should really look at. It's like trauma to the neck, right?
Yeah, especially if a patient's watching this, a patient, provider, anything, if they know they've had trauma and they're having symptoms and they've been diagnosed, like, absolutely get it. And honestly, I need to be careful saying this, but obviously our conviction in what we do is strong. I would even say if you have MS and you know you've had trauma, even if you haven't, I would go get checked out, right? I would go to an upper cervical chiropractor right away, get care, get adjusted. And if you want to go through all of that other stuff as well, for the patient to go directly to an upper cervical chiropractor to start care to get as healthy as possible, while they look into possibly getting some of this imaging done. And I was going to ask if you could tell the people listening, where can they get these Phonar upright? Do they need to go to Melville, New York, or is there a resource for them to see where they could possibly go?
Yes. So phonar.com, you can definitely call that. There's a website, FONAR.com. Go to the website. There's a phone number there. You can call them and ask them for helpful, tips on where to find the closest machine. There aren't many of them. I think there's less than 20 in the country. If you're on the East Coast, if you're in New England, I believe that New York, there are a handful of them in New York, and there's one down in Florida. I've actually been working with the machine, the people that run the machine down in Florida. In Tampa, I believe, is where that one's at. There's one, I believe, right by you, Dr. Leach, in Seattle, somewhere there.
Could be Bellevue, but I'll have to check.
There used to be, it wasn't Bellevue, it was down Renton. It was down in Renton. It was it wasn't a Phonar center. It was a CDI, I think, is what it was. Okay. But anyways, so just for your people there. Yeah. So, and then if you want to look it up, actually, the people that are out there interested, upright imaging. I think upright. If you look up upright imaging or upright MRI, there's a locator. So there should be. So if you have questions about that, definitely reach out to Dr. Leach or me, and
I'll put it in the notes in the description below for the video.
Yep.
Try and link that up for people.
Yeah. But
Excellent.
great paper, and good review.
Awesome. Yeah, and for those listening, go check out the other two if you're interested in the CTE stuff, if you're interested in the hydrodynamic stuff. I think it's episode 2 and 4, and this is episode number 7. So go check those out. Anything else, Dr. Evans?
No, that's it.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, good sir, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
That's it for this episode. So what did you learn that fascinated you or surprised you about the research today? Join or start the conversation in the comments below. Hey, thanks so much for watching. To watch more of our research shows, click or tap the screen right there. To subscribe to the channel, click or tap the screen right there. Until next time, I'm Dr. Kevin Leach with the Upper Cervical Chiropractic Research Show, bringing awareness to conservative primary spine care, upper cervical chiropractic care, and traditional chiropractic. Until next time, take care and take care of your spine. It's the only one you'll ever have.